Hello, everyone, and thank you for not running away for lunch. This is a lunch hour, but this is, it's my honor, really, to moderate such an important and interesting and fascinating panel. My name's Stuart. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm making films at the moment in Ukraine and Bosnia. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to From Frontline to Film, wartime journalism, investigation, and impact filmmaking. Now, you've probably heard when there's a danger zone, people talk about everyone running away from the danger zone. And you'll also probably have heard how police, military, firemen and women, medics run towards the danger. What people don't mention is there is another group that heads towards the danger, and that's journalists and filmmakers. And why they do that, how they do that, for what purpose, is really what we're going to unpack in the next hour. And to help us do that, we have three people who've chosen to make their living running towards danger, to report on it, to lift it up for the world. And so I'm going to ask our team to introduce themselves for you. So, Mstyslav, do you want to go first?
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for being here. Thank you for the invitation. I am Mstyslav Chernov. I am a filmmaker, director of 20 Days in Mariupol, and I'm an investigative journalist. I'm a war correspondent and a writer as well.
Great. Lisa.
Hello. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Yelyzaveta Strii. I'm a video journalist for Agence Presse, and also I'm a director of documentaries. Thanks.
Well, my name is Danylo Mokryk, and I thank you for having me too. I'm an investigative journalist at the Kyiv Independence War Crimes Investigations Unit. And what I do is investigate war crimes and turn them into documentaries. That's basically it.
Now, there are many ways we can make a living. You've all chosen pretty tough ones, and really I'd like to start to find out why you've chosen this path. So Danylo, let's start with you. Why do you do what you do?
Because I believe there is nothing more important happening in Ukraine right now, and I'm a Ukrainian. And because when the full-scale invasion started, it became pretty clear from the beginning that war crimes are a way Russia is waging this war. It's part of their tactic. It's part of their strategy. And that was something that I wanted to scream about as a human being to the world. And investigating war crimes and making documentaries about them became a way to turn this urge to scream, this emotion, into something productive, into something that can make a difference, because screaming will not. But turning this scream into a documentary, into an investigation, could. That would be my answer, I guess.
So it's a very strategic decision born out of a very clear sense of purpose for you.
It was a necessity, partly. But yes, it did have this rational reasoning behind it. There was nothing else I really could imagine myself doing as a journalist and as an investigative journalist at this time. I mean, I have been investigating corruption in Ukraine for the previous 6 years, because that was what I thought was the main danger for Ukraine at the time. War crimes became this biggest danger right now, so I switched to that.
Lisa, what drives you? Why have you taken this career path?
Just in January, just recently, 2024, it was 49 injured in Kyiv and 61 injured in Kharkiv. And it just one number that like telling you why. It's many, many numbers. And in a journalism, it's important also to make these numbers in stories that matters, you know. And it's really important for me to influence on people. And what we are doing is telling stories telling stories that way to show the world what is going on in Ukraine. And it's really scary what's going on there.
So again, for you, it's always been a sense of purpose. You know, some people say, oh, when I grow up, I want to be a journalist. I just want to be a journalist. I like the idea of being a journalist. But it seems both of you have thought, no, there's something in the world that I want to do. And, oh, journalism is actually a very effective way to do it. Was that the way with you, or did you just say one day, I just want to be a journalist?
Sure, it's a passion. I want to be a journalist for sure. I knew it from my student's age, but I started my frontline career when it was a full-scale Russian invasion, and I understood that I need to be there. Definitely, I need to tell people what's going on there, and as we are international agency, it's extremely important to show without any propaganda, very truthful, and it matters.
Mstyslav, how, well, first of all, why did you choose war as the focus of your art? And how did you get into it? What was the break that led you to that first frontline experience?
There was, as for many, almost for, I think, all of Ukrainian journalists, was 10 years ago. Well, this war started 10 years ago. 11 already. It just feels endless. And first of all, it became a defining event in every I feel like every generation has a defining event in their lives, and for several generations, this war became not only journalists or filmmakers. It just became a defining factor. When I say defining factor, I mean defining for identity, for self-identity, not also for the country identity. But we are speaking about personal experiences. So yeah, this war was a defining, identity-forming event that happened to me and many other Ukrainians. And if you are already a documentarian, if you are already an investigative journalist, and there is a war in your country, you're just automatically taking on a new role. Whether you can hold on for years and keep doing it or not, that's more of a question. Is do you have enough motivation? Do you have enough energy? And that's the challenge. The choice to become is not the challenge. The challenge is to keep doing it for years and years and not to stop. And that's where loss helps in a way. I'm in a very pessimistic mood today. Sorry. So, Kharkiv is being attacked, and every day I am from Kharkiv, and every day Russians are moving forward on that front, and I keep reading news, and I'm in Khan, and I feel bad, but also, again, this is an opportunity for us to keep speaking, right? So anyway, what I'm saying, that urge, that feeling that you should do at least something, you have to help in some way, is what keeps you moving forward. And more you lose, more every Ukrainian loses, more every soldier loses, more every journalist loses, more stronger is the motivation. The tragedy itself becomes a motivation, as let's say counterintuitive as it is. So you keep pushing forward towards the risk, towards the internal, we all falling apart in a way. But more tragedies you live through, more tragedies your fellow countrymen live through, more you go forward. It's kind of a trap, but it's the only way so far.
You've
despair may become a drive.
Exactly.
Despair becomes
Exactly.
drive. Yeah, I agree completely with what Mstyslav said. Yeah.
Also, I don't really want to make it sound tragic. Every one of us makes a choice anyway. You know, we could do something else.
But it certainly helps explain why you choose to overcome the psychological issues, all the problems that you stick at it. And I think we'll unpack a little later about the cost that it takes out on a war journalist day after day, week after week, year after year. But just for now, just fill us in and everybody on really what exactly you're doing at the moment, what the day job is, how it works. And Danylo, let's start with you. You're at the Kyiv Independent, probably the world's most respected English language newspaper coming out of Ukraine. And I think uniquely, there's a war crimes investigative unit within the paper, and you're part of that. So what is your job? How do you work there?
We are 3 journalists there, and each of us conducts their own investigation. So we do not share our stories. And we have so far released 4 documentaries, and 5th one is on the way. The first one was about the forcible abduction of Ukrainian children, and we succeeded in identifying the officials responsible for that. The second one was mine about the killings of Ukrainian children by the Russian forces. And by killings, I do not mean, by artillery or by missiles. I mean they were killed by firearms. And there are more than 36 cases like that in Ukraine. Then we did a documentary about torture of Ukrainian POWs in Olenivka. The 4th one was about the genocidal nature of the Russian war in Ukraine. And the 5th one will be about sex crimes. So we are now trying to... The problem is that we often have to work with war crimes that happened on the territories that we can access, the territories that were once occupied and are now liberated. Because there we can travel, we can talk to people, we can talk to witnesses, and so on and so on. We can investigate the area. The problem is that it does create this illusion that the war crimes happen. All of the war crimes happened in 2022, which is not true. They keep on happening on the occupied territories. The problem is that we do not have access there. And we are trying to do something about that right now, without me, going into details, because this is work in progress. But that's what the problem is. That we are not only we have to not only go near the front line to access, the places where war crimes were committed, but we also have to think about what is happening beyond the front line. And that's what we are trying to do right now. So I would not, say more about the documentaries itself. They are to be found on the Kyiv Independent's YouTube, but that's the resume.
You can watch them online. They're incredibly powerful. They're free to watch, etc. So, Lisa, turning to you, AFP. You're also a documentarian.
Mstyslav.
Yep. But you are a journalist. So in terms of news reporting and documentary reporting, you've done both, is that right? What would you say the difference was between being a news journalist and a documentarian in a war zone?
Actually, when you are a news journalist, you are just working. It's a daily job. You did the news, spread it on the wire, that's it. And when you're doing a documentary, you're leading with your character for, it could be from months till 1 year or even more. And it also matters how deep you go with that. We also trying to do news, also trying to do it deeply, but anyway, it's a daily life of journalists. We just did. And spread it on the wire. But we also have nice features. We did stories about childhood during the war, widows in their 20s, for example, PTSD after the war, etc., etc. So it's really interesting topics we choose on the front line as well.
And you spent a lot of time on the front line. What does that do to you as a human being. How do you cope with that? And is it a case that you could be there for months and months, or do you rotate with other journalists?
Yeah, we're rotating because it's not allowed. It's not allowed to be more than 2 weeks, because otherwise you maybe can see some danger. You will be more used to shellings, etc. So it's really
complacent. You become complacent.
Yeah. So we need to change every 2 weeks, and yeah, especially after the death of my lovely colleague Armand Saldin, it's really, really difficult, especially after that, to go to the front line. It's a tough, and we changed the security rules. Yeah, but it's still our job, and we need to do that.
And Mstyslav, obviously, the world knows you at the moment as a documentarian. Have you always been that, or is the journalist in you reporting for the daily news bulletin, has that been part of your wartime experience?
I worked for AP for 10 years, again, since invasion started in Ukraine. And since then, I've been to not only to Ukraine, but other war zones, and not only war zones. And I've been doing mostly news, but as time passed, I was doing more investigations and longer stories, more of the feature stories. But that really depends. It really depends on the nature of the event that is unfolding. If there is something extremely urgent that is unfolding in front of you and needs to be reported, that's the priority. That's your priority. When things slow down and you have time to go deeper into motivations and in the let's say analysis of the nature of the events you're seeing in different countries and different wars, because war and conflict and revolutions, all these are events that are really showing human nature, at least the destructive part of it or creative part of it, but mostly destructive. And so you always want to go deeper rather than just to show what. It's also why, and the urge to answer that question is.
And in doing so, you make yourself more vulnerable, I guess, as you want to get deeper and closer to your subject.
Psychologically vulnerable, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, this, especially when we speak about the war crimes or destruction or impact the war has on the civil population or on the soldiers, when we are diving deeper in those topics, certainly to adequately be able to tell that story, you need to be empathetic. And by being empathetic, I don't mean just to cry when the person in front of you cries. Is that to feel the same, to feel part of that story. If you are telling the story of starving, fearful, bleeding people, you also have to be starving and being afraid and bleed. Otherwise, your audience will not feel the same, right? Is that what we're trying to do? We're trying to take a person who comfortably walks the street of Cannes and invite them, or Los Angeles or Berlin, and bring them into the war zone for 2 minutes, for half an hour, for 2 hours. But that's what we're trying to do. And to do that, you have to be part of that event.
I think it's a really important point. And Danylo, there's a colleague of yours in the documentary we're making who said, we need to be a bridge between the front line and the comfortable living rooms of the West.
But that's the thing.
Yeah.
There's one particular sentence in 20 Days in Mariupol that is very striking for me. At one point you're saying it is painful to watch, but it must be painful to watch. The thing is that we are dealing with pain. We are trying to convey pain to others. And we had a panel yesterday when I said that I find it increasingly difficult because Ukraine has become this constant flow of pain, and we are trying to convey this pain through our work in different ways. But people, my impression is that they are trying to shield themselves. The international audience tries to shield itself from the pain today. So how do you, well, actually, that would be my question. How do you still make them accept this pain, make them open, keep the eyes open for this pain from Ukraine? That is interesting. The psychological part of it, of how we live through dealing ourselves with this, is interesting too, and we'll maybe continue. But how do you
get through pain fatigue?
Yeah, how do you get through to the international audience who doesn't want more pain?
Is that a rhetorical question or a real question?
No. I'd really like to know.
The answer is, I'm trying to figure this out, right? And we actually all trying to figure this out. We speak with it through the different mediums and try to reach the audience through different mediums. But what strikes me, again, I don't want to sound like, investigations and documentaries and news from the war zone is the only way to understand human nature, is the only way to make the world a better place. Deeper I go into this desperation, that of course I will be my main focus because I'm Ukrainian, I'm a documentarian, what else would I do? But deeper I dive there, further 20 days goes into its screenings and into its impact or lack of impact, more I understand that maybe there is just no way to make, sorry, this is a big word, but bear with me. Maybe there is no way to make the world a better place through showing the world the violence. Maybe, and on the long run, I don't mean every single war crime has to be recorded, period, and every single war criminal has to answer for that. That's for sure. But on the long run, maybe there is no way to make an anti-war film. Maybe there is no way to really shake people in Europe and in the US and in the East and West through showing them violence. Maybe you should talk about love. Maybe you should talk about hope.
Answering on your question, I'd like to say that, Ukraine was on top, I think, almost 2 years, but after 7th of October 2023, I think it went down a bit after the conflict in Gaza, right? So that's why now it's really difficult to find a story which really will surprise somehow people, but we're trying to do that. And as in previous panel, people said already, that if it's interesting story, people would love to watch it anyway. So we just do our best and find the stories that can touch the hearts, but it's really becoming really difficult now, much more difficult than 2 years ago.
Before we move on from the sort of why and the how, something that's just struck me, I mean, clearly you're Ukrainians making a film about Ukraine in a war, the future, freedom, etc. Do you think if you were reporting in another part of the world, let's say Gaza or Somalia or wherever, as Ukrainian journalists, someone from outside the country, you would be better journalists? Or are you better journalists because you come from Ukraine and you're reporting on Ukraine?
I would not certainly be a better journalist because I would not be as passionate about what's happening there than about what's happening in Ukraine. And I do believe that passion is essential for making something really good. So it always feels when you have a product made with passion and then just made a product made, professionally, but uninspired.
To be Ukrainian journalist, for one hand, it's difficult because you need every time to be up over what you are doing. But for the other hand, it's really motivating because it matters for you what you are doing. So it's really motivating.
Mstyslav, you have the advantage in a way of having reported yourself from other war zones around the world, from outside the context of that country. Do you ever compare your reports, your work from those countries to the work you're doing now?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot, actually. After Ukraine, I went to Iraq and then to Syria, briefly to Libya and Gaza and Nagorno-Karabakh. And then I was coming back to Ukraine almost every time between those wars. And it's actually, so partially it is eye-opening because when you spend a lot of time in your country in the middle of the war, you inevitably start feeling that this is the only thing that matters in the world, and this is the most important event that is happening in the world. And right now, Ukraine is, if not the most, but one of the most important events in the world because it influences the whole dynamics of human relationships on the planet. But nevertheless, it's important to remember that it's not the only thing that is happening. The world is so big, and there are so many important issues, and leaving your country for a while to understand that human suffering is something universal, and that all the conflicts that are happening around the world are in a way connected politically as well. And that helps you to come back and keep telling the story of your country from better perspective, from a wider perspective. It gives you an understanding of how the world from outside sees your country and your war. So it helps you there. But also, again, as I said, war is a quite universal experience. Beside that, we can't compare war in Israel and Gaza to the war in Ukraine because they're culturally very different. They have very different contexts, historically very different contexts. But the experience is universal. The destructive experience of war on human is universal. And just knowing that is very important for reporting.
Also, my colleagues was sharing, I've never been to other conflicts, but my colleagues shared to me that it's really different war, because war in Ukraine is a war of artillery, and you never know when it will arrive. So it's really much more dangerous. So how do you feel about this?
Oh, the war in Ukraine right now is definitely the most dangerous we've experienced in the last 10 years. Before, it was all up to your kind of knowledge, how to navigate difficult situations, and also luck. Because, weapons were not so precise. But right now, if someone sees you on that side, you're dead. That's it. The drone doesn't really misses you. The warfare became so sophisticated that reporting on the front line became almost impossible.
You bring up this word danger, and I really want to unpack that a moment, because I've worked in danger zones with camera people who seem to have no radar for danger. They just seem to get off on it, and they charge after, and they charge towards it, and they don't make the evaluation, is this safe, ultimately? And I wonder how you deal with that and make that decision. What is the overriding element in you to decide, yep, I am going to go there and film that, or no, this is too dangerous, I'm going to pull back?
I think I trust the locals when I travel near the front line. For the documentary about the killed children, for example, we had to travel to the near the front line in the Kherson Oblast, in the Kherson region, and there was this village right near the Dnipro River, on the banks of the Dnipro River, And we went there to interview the witnesses of a killing of a child. And the boy himself, he was buried on the cemetery. And locals strongly advised us not to go there because there was still a lot of shells and some of them did not yet explode. And second, there might be a sniper working because the village itself, it was like situated uphill like this. And it was very visible from the other side of the Dnieper River, which was already occupied by Russians. So something told me that, yeah, I should maybe heed this advice. But other than that, we were also generally, we were not, let's say, encouraged to go to this village. And we were, to say the truth, we were not allowed by the authorities to go there because there was shelling and artillery fighting. But we still did because we thought that we had to. So I think it's about necessity. You can, if you think that something is really necessary for your work, it was necessary for us to go to the village and to interview people there because no one else saw the killing, the murder itself. So we did that, realizing that it is dangerous. But if it was, some additional shot just to have the cemetery filmed and the grave filmed, and it might be too dangerous, then you just don't do it. We got the interviews that we wanted, and that's it. That's maybe the logic, the level of necessity and the level of danger, and you can compare them.
Lisa?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's about necessity. So, for example, 2 years ago when we were in Bakhmut, it was we really needed that because it was last days. It was Ukrainian. So we took the risk and we went. But for example, for the artillery, we don't go anymore just to have fresh images after the case with my colleague Roman Soldin, because he died after the artillery. So that's the case. If we really need that, we go. If we can skip that, we don't take the risk. And for sure, we need to listen to the military, listen our own feelings. If you feel unsafe, if you feel that you better stay.
The thing is, we have all three a bit different experiences because I do not spend a lot of time near the front line. I go there for a specific reason, I get what I want, and I leave. So I do not get complacent. I do not need those 2 weeks shifts. I still have the sense of danger pretty well calibrated. But I'm not sure how this works with Mstyslav. How that worked in Mariupol.
You don't think I have calibrated sense of danger?
It's what I call a danger radar, which at the beginning is very acute. And perhaps as you experience the front line more, and hey, after a week I'm still alive, and after a month I'm still alive, and after a year I'm still alive. What happens to your danger radar? Does it weaken and you find yourself taking risks and you go back and think, oh, why did I do that?
Well, there's two ways your psyche can go from there. The one way is that your body develops a response, with a fear response, which is very hard to fight, and you just can't function. That's quite possible. I've experienced that, and even to get out of a house the next day and to keep working is hard. You choose to succumb to it, or just to push yourself over that, or yes, you're developing a dangerous misconception of your immortality. Because if you survived a danger, if part of you feels immortal. That is a very dangerous feeling. But I remember in 2014, I just started working for AP. I had a quite experienced cameraman with me, and I was doing some translations for him, and I was doing the photos, and he was doing videos, and it was the first war, right? That I've never experienced anything like that, and it wasn't the first for him. And I remember being like, "Oh, we need to go there. We need to go there. Like, let's jump in this trench. Let's drive to that place." Something happened there, and it's like, "Mstyslav, calm down, calm down." The full quote sounds, "Mstyslav, calm down is just news," but what he meant is that you have to choose your battles very carefully, because. Visuals is not the most important thing. The most important thing is the story and understanding why. And as time, and yeah, I remember. So he said to me, no. Once he said to me, no, we're not gonna go there. And I said, but how do you know when to risk and when not to risk? He said, well, if I know that, I still remember that moment he said, when I know for certain that Russian tanks are rolling across the Ukrainian border, that would be a historical event, and we need to be there, and we'll risk, right? And so this zooming out and trying to understand what's the significance of what of the story you're doing is on a bigger scale, on a historical scale, or on the scale of a larger picture for the world. On what's the impact of that, then it's easier to make that choice, following a specific safety protocols, which help you to not to get to feel too invincible, or
In business, they call it a sort of cost-benefit analysis. As you said, how important historically is this? Okay, I'm going to risk a bit more, perhaps. But there's one question I always wanted to ask you. There were other journalists in Mariupol. They pulled out as it got more dangerous. You stayed in. Was that a choice? Why did you stay in and the others leave?
No, well, I can't speak for others, because I know that the most important battle was at that moment in Kyiv. So it felt like Kyiv was about to fall, and clearly most of these journalists wanted to go to pick that battle instead of Mariupol, where it still wasn't much happening. And I remember our coordinator calling us and calling me and saying, "Hey, it's quiet in Mariupol. Maybe you want to go to Kyiv, because Zelensky just said it's next 3 days the destiny of Ukraine is going to be decided." And at that point, again, we sat and we thought, well, what do we do? And the decision was to stay in Mariupol and to keep this, to stay there, because it was personal. We knew that sooner or later it will become very rough for Mariupol. And also, I have to say, the Mantas Kvidoravičius also didn't leave. There was a Lithuanian filmmaker that didn't leave the city. He was unfortunately executed on a Russian checkpoint as he was trying to leave the same road as we were. He was captured and executed. So we were just more lucky than he was. His film Mariupol is 2 premiered in Cannes 2 years ago, by the way. Before 20 Days in Mariupol, so I highly recommend that. But he didn't survive. So we were not the only ones who stayed. It just seemed.
So that there's a news judgment going on in that decision, in that equation of stay or go. There was a news judgment as opposed to just a danger judgment.
Yeah, but you assess if you know that there are ways for you to escape later, if you know that there are ways for you to survive for certain, until you will be free to leave, and so all that consider first the safety. You consider the safety, then you consider the impact of the story, the possible impact of the story. That's kind of the assessment. That's the order of the assessments you do. You start with the safety for sure.
You bring up a question which for all journalists is terrifying, and that is the targeting of journalists in war and how that's changing. Lisa, usually you have press across your flak jacket and you've got a different colored helmet and all that. How's that playing out in Ukraine at the moment? Because traditionally, that outfit was a shield. Now it seems it's a target.
It's a target, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I really can say that we didn't go for several places because press officers told us that better to put it out because even Russians even accept as a target even medical vehicles. So it's really dangerous to put out, dangerous to put in. You never knows. So it's just about the luck, but we refuse to go in some places just because we needed to put out that, and we can't. We need to wear blue helmets and the press because otherwise you can't work.
Danylo, do you and the Kyiv independent journalists wear that press insignia?
Actually, I did not personally when I went near the front line because I did not see the necessity of it. The thing is that the thing about the Russian way of waging this war that really needs to be understood at one point is that there are no rules for them. And this mark press may be a shield in a war where rules are still upheld in a way. But there are no real rules for Russian forces. There is no real international humanitarian law for Russian forces. There is no international criminal law for Russian forces. So once you really understand that, you will not think of shields. You will just understand that, well, the reality is there is no shield. The reality is there is no rule. There is just you and, well, your judgment. That's it.
Do all of you think that there has been a change in war? I mean, what you bring up there about rules. You know, maybe after, World War II, there was an aspiration to a set of rules. We're gentlemen, we fight like this. Civilians are out of bounds, and you don't treat, prisoners of war like this. Do you think there was ever a war where that was the case, such that, it's not an evolution, it's just a continuation? Or is something different happening here?
I don't think that ever happened. Like rules of war and laws of war, that was something always broken. But the question is one of degree. So is it massive? Is it just something that happens? Or is it, again, characteristic of how a certain army is conducting, is waging war? And that's the point that I was trying to make from the beginning. We are the main reason we decided to investigate war crimes in Ukraine is because they are characteristic of this war. They explain this war. They are not just an element. They are at the core of this. So yeah.
Mstyslav, you again thinking.
I just want to add.
Yeah.
I really feel what you say because there's a big difference between the incident, a journalist killed, and a journalist target. It's the two targeted. It's two different events, and the only way to understand. Let's say, okay, I'll give you another example. Let's say that the hospital was bombed. And you can always say that, well, we didn't know there was a hospital, right? That's what Russians would say. For example, we didn't know that was a hospital, or there was a military target, or it could be hundreds of explanations. The only way to qualify that, or partially to qualify that for a war crime, it's to see was that systematic. So exactly. if there are several other hospitals were bombed across the country at the same day or within several days by different parts of the Russian army, by different generals, then you can see the system. So what you're investigating sometimes is not even the specific events, but the existence of a system of the warfare, and if the warfare includes this attacks as its tactics, and we see that journalists are our target now, and they're a systematic target. And the reason for that is that information for most of the countries, even for some of the democratic countries, became a weapon of war. And therefore, by extension, very unfortunately, all the journalists are considered as soldiers or weapons that need to be destroyed if they don't, conform with your point of view.
There's an intentionality behind it. The propaganda war is not just something that happens on paper or in digital form. It's happening in physical space.
Just to add to what Mstyslav said about accidents, and systemic nature actually of war crimes. That's what we did exactly for my film about the killings of children. We took stories from the south of Ukraine, north of Ukraine, and east of Ukraine, because we have like dozens of those stories, and they were done in different regions at a different time by different units. So each isolated case might be an incident, but if you see the broad picture, you understand that there's a system in it. There's a psychology behind it.
Definitely, the same with schools and hospitals. Like in Donetsk region, it's been shelled plenty of schools. Very, very, like.
I'll give you a very visual example to what you said. We have several different sets of bulletproof vests in the office, right? And in the beginning of the war, they were all blue. Right now, you go and you choose between the olive one and the blue one. You still have a price sign. It's not like you are posing as a soldier and it's not camouflage. But I find myself picking more and more often the olive one rather than the blue one. I know that the blue will be a target.
Yeah.
In Mariupol, I was in the blue one. I wouldn't wear it right now anymore.
I want to move to something. We've got about 10 minutes left. One of the challenges for journalists is always objectivity. Philosophically, you can argue, can one have objectivity at all? But we've all talked about passion, and passion being important as an element in the way you do your job. And I wonder if you feel that being objective, you can also sometimes call on you to criticize your own side. I mean, I know the Kyiv Independent has had some really tough decisions to make.
We did. But okay, well, I have been asked this question a few times already. Why aren't you investigating Ukrainian war crimes? Do not Ukrainian armed forces commit war crimes? And I say, sure they do. But that is exactly the difference that we were just talking about. Those are isolated cases. This is not a system. This is not a way to wage war for the Ukrainian armed forces. So do I think that every war crime, including those committed by the Ukrainian soldiers, war injustice? Yes, I do. Would I pick a story about a Ukrainian war crime to make it an investigation and documentary about it? No, I would not, because it does not reflect the general reality. It would be an isolated story, maybe an interesting story to tell, but it does not explain this war. So it's not by some propaganda reasoning that I do not do this. It's just because my goal is to explain the war in Ukraine, and that would not do it. That's it.
Picking up on that point, Lisa, your editor rings you up. You say, we think there's a story, war crimes being committed by this battalion in the Ukrainian armed forces. What do you say to him? Would you do it? Would you go? Where would you stand on that position?
A war crime by Ukrainian. Yeah, for sure, we will film, and but it's really difficult case, when you understand that something going on that you need to film, you film that for sure, and then you need to check, and for sure you think about how it influences next, because you can film something not really systematically. Yeah, it could be interesting stories, Danylo said, but it will play for Russian propaganda, and it doesn't show the war and doesn't explain the war. So, but if it would be really systematical case, for sure we need to show it and publish it. Yes, it's painful, but here we are. But for now, I can tell that I'm so lucky to work on the Ukrainian side, because Ukrainian side gives an access, and we can still go with limits, but we can still go and film and investigate and do our job. From Russian side, they don't have access at all.
We've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to whiz on to the final part, which is, I mean, apart from war, journalists, you're human beings. Your sons, your boyfriends, girlfriends, etc., etc. You know, as Shakespeare said, if you cut us, do we not bleed? And I wonder mentally, and I've been working a lot with the International Documentary Association on this, the mental health of documentary makers and journalists, especially in war zones. How do you cope? How did you cope when you came out of Mariupol? How do you cope now at night when you close your eyes and you probably see things no human being should be ever experienced to? How do you cope with that?
First of all, that is an important question to ask. And again, I think mental health of journalists, documentarians, and other people who work in this field has to be in focus, because you cannot adequately tell people's stories. You cannot even try to be objective and truthful if you're not mentally healthy. That's it. You have to be mentally healthy to do this work. So, of course, they have to be people you talk to. Of course, they have to be, therapy available if needed. That being said, of course, in the middle of the war, when you are in a war zone, that is not something your body wants or needs. And the most difficult part of PTSD and of this impact is coming much later, when the war is over, 6 months, 1 year, when the silence is around you. That's when it hits you. And so far there has been no silence around us. So it is probably too early to deal with that, but it has to be dealt with. And the best way to do that is to prepare that it's inevitable. So as long as you're entering the war zone, you have to prepare yourself for this impact and give yourself some emotional tools. Like wearing the bulletproof vests. You also have to have some kind of psychological preparation for that, and that's where you start.
I completely agree with Mstyslav that you need to be prepared before going there, because when I started to go to the frontline, I just didn't care, and I just worked and watched only on my screen, that's it, and I just didn't think about that. But then, after one colleague died, other colleague wounded, and when it comes closer to you and you understand the real danger, you become thinking another way. And after that incident, really many colleagues can't still cope with that. Some of them just stopped to work on the front line. Some of them went to other departments, and it's still pain that it's with you maybe forever, and you just do your job and go to take help if needed. That's it. What I can do.
Let's say you've just before we come to you, Danylo, but say editor says take 2 weeks off, just go and find yourself again. What would you do? Where would you go?
It's so strange, because after you get used to work on the front line, it's really very weird to see the sea here. And you also, but probably I even couldn't, I don't know, don't look at my phone, because I also used to read the news, and now it's about Kyiv, and it's really painful as well. But probably if I will throw out my phone, I would go somewhere, Italy probably.
Danylo, I know you once told me that you couldn't read fiction. The normal places you go to relax, you couldn't do. So how do you keep it together?
Well, work helps me to keep it together, but the problem is that sometimes you do not really, feel in the moment or understand how the work may affect you. I have to work a lot with images of dead bodies and dead children and videos of death. And sometimes it hits you later. I mean, you seem fine looking at it, examining, investigating all it, and then at some point you just start having trouble sleeping. You just get insomnia. So I think it's very important to just be, understanding of what is happening inside of you. For me, therapy helps a lot, and I think that we as a Ukrainian society, the Ukrainian society in general, we are already very traumatized by this war, and we will become more traumatized with time, and we would need massive therapy for the society. But it's not only, about seeing shrink. It's about being able as a society to work the trauma. And I think that thinking about the trauma and trying to process it is also something that we are trying to help to do. And I think trying to explain the war and doing documentaries about it is a part of this process too, of processing the trauma, understanding the war, rationalizing it in a way. So yeah.
Last question, short answers if we can, because time is almost up. Christiane Amanpour, who you know is one of America's most famous foreign correspondents, one of her first assignments in a war zone was Bosnia in the 90s. And I was speaking to her recently, and she kept saying, "We did our job." The journalists, the war journalists, we did our job. The politicians, maybe not. And that was one of the problems with the Bosnian War, as in all wars. Were the politicians reacting to what was happening on the ground in a constructive, positive way that would lead to the end of the war? The role of you guys in wars and situations where she said, you can understand, we, the journalists, did our job. Do you think journalists are doing their job in Ukraine at the moment?
I think they do. And I think that at least once this is over, we would be at least able to tell ourselves that if anyone in the world says that, well, I still did not understand this war in Ukraine, I still didn't understand what was happening and why, we would be able to tell ourselves, well, we gave you everything you needed to understand. And if you didn't understand, it's not because you didn't have the opportunity, it's because you didn't want to. So I think that's very important. We give people opportunity to understand.
Lisa.
Completely agree. We do our job, and it's still possible because we have access. We are lucky.
Final word.
Yeah, the question is, how do we define job of the journalist? Because now people expect journalists to be activists in many cases. So you may be thinking you're doing a great job, but a lot of people will think you're not. And that's the question: where do we actually right now draw this line of where the journalist's job is? And I agree with you. In a world where there is chaos of the information, there is a necessity to actually just to make sure that everything is recorded. There's so much happening. Everything is live. And there's so many war crimes, so many events, and to be able to analyze all that, we have to make sure that everything is recorded. So maybe we, as much as we would like to think that we are making a huge impact on politicians, on the societies around the world, even if we don't, we at least have to make sure that everything is thoroughly recorded, logged, listed, saved multiple times and copied. And when the time comes, when the court comes, when the history rethinking comes, when someone will come out and say, oh, this didn't happen, Mariupol wasn't destroyed, Bucha didn't happen, we will say, hey, no, we actually did. Look at this. It's all here. So maybe that's the job.
Well, time is up, I'm afraid. I think over the last hour, we have been able to see how important this job is, how dangerous this job is. And I hope you'll join me in giving a round of applause to these three people, and thank you for doing your job so well. Thank you.